Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Let's kick off with proposals to devolve more financial powers to the mayor in the capital's boroughs. The suggestions are contained in the second report of the London Finance Commission out this week. The first report, you may remember, happened under Mayor Boris Johnson. This one's gone further in what it's asking for. Retention of some income tax, maybe a share of VAT, as well as control of property taxes like stamp duty and council tax. And it recommends looking at new taxes, like a London tourism levy and maybe a health tax. The Commission chair is Tony Travers.
What we're recommending that's different this time is that, in the spirit of further devolution, which the government itself has been talking about, the possibility of greater health devolution, skills and further education, possibly more transport devolution and so on, that you could begin not only to devolve property taxes fully to London, but go beyond that and take part of income tax or VAT and assign part of the yield to London. And that wouldn't mean that London set the tax rates, but they would keep part of the yield that was generated here and could therefore drive up the yield by pursuing particular economic policies that would make the city grow faster, and therefore London's boroughs and the mayor would keep more of that extra growth.
Chris, well, an awful lot of detail in there, but in principle, anything you hear there you wouldn't go and do, or do you guard against any of this stuff?
Well, I think the idea of devolution for London is a good idea. Give London more control of its own tax base. The one idea I didn't hear in the film just then was the idea of actually letting London keep some of its business rates, or at least keep the business rate uplift from a starting point. That is
in there as well, actually.
That's a good idea.
Broadly, what about the others that you're hearing there? What would you do? Income tax, VAT? You heard what Tony Travers says there. It's getting a portion of it that's raised in London. That's
right. Well, I think the idea is to have a starting point that is fiscally neutral. So you start off where we are now, and then if some of these taxes grow, meaning the economy's growing, they generate more receipts, London would keep that growth as an incentive for London's mayor and London's assembly to help London grow. For me, business rates is actually the most sensible one, because that is directly linked to encouraging business. The Chancellor, I think, has said that in the budget coming up this spring, he will be making a financial devolution offer to London and to the Mayor of London, and I would certainly support that, particularly in this area of business rates, where there are, I think, a lot of gains to be had.
Clive, ever do you just sign up to all this?
Well, yeah, sure, but business rate, London's taken a big hit on business rate, money being taken out of London as a result of the government's changes. But I think this is a discussion that's overdue, because I mean, I know it's becoming a bit of a cliche to say, you know, in this sort of post-Brexit period, but London is a huge shop window for Britain. What this report is talking about is giving London the resources to generate that economic activity that is so vital for the whole country, and not cutting off the important redistribution of taxes from the economic activity that is concentrated around London and the South East. And that's a very important thing, and it gives London the devolved power to be able to make those decisions that will drive that forwards, and it's important that we do that.
What would you say about a tourism tax, though? Is that quite dangerous? Is that tricky? Does that put people off?
I think it is. It has to be looked at, I think, but I'd be very careful about how you do it, because we already have a very high rate of VAT compared with our European competitors, and what we want is more tourism to come here. So, I would look at possibly the government on areas like hospitality and things like that, looking to be more competitive with our European partners. For instance, it's half the rate, I think, in France, and bringing more tourism in.
Do you, just to be absolutely clear from you though, Chris, do you believe the government is committed to going anywhere near some of this stuff? Stamp duty, for instance, you know how much is raised in the capital. Why isn't a lot more of that retained?
Well, I think the list we've seen in the report by Tony Travers is a very long list of taxes, which adds up to a very large amount of money. There is a balance to strike, so I think it's right that London does get more control of its tax base. So I think things like business rates make sense. If you push it too far, as Clive was just saying, you then impede the government's ability to help out other parts of the country, bits of the southwest or the northwest, which do need a bit of help.
But they also impede London and the vital infrastructure it wants.
Yeah, so that's why you need a balance. And I think what I hope the Chancellor does in his spring budget, and he said he will do this, there will be something in the spring budget that gives London more devolution. You've got to strike a balance between letting London keep a larger proportion of the taxes raised here. That is definitely right. But at the same time, giving the government the financial firepower to look after the whole United Kingdom. As a London MP, I do want to see the balance shift towards London, and I am very confident that we will see that in the spring budget.
OK, let's move on. Talking of money, the Mayor's budget proposals for next year are currently being poured over at City Hall, and there's been more talk about whether Sadiq Khan was as clear as he might have been when he promised to freeze fares. That did not, as it turned out, mean keeping all fares down, as those using trains and travel cards have found out. Andrew Cryan has the latest.
Back when he was running for office last year, this was the Mayor's flagship policy.
I've got a fully funded package to freeze fares over 4 years, so Londoners won't pay a penny more in 2020 than they do now.
But after winning the keys to City Hall, he clarified that the freeze would only apply to single fares and not travel cards. Those would be going up. Now, what Sadiq Khan says is this: travel cards cover all public transport in London, including suburban rail services, which are run by private companies and not Transport for London. Now, the fares on those lines are set by the government, and this year they're going up. So, the Mayor says, it's out of his hands. That, however, is not necessarily the impression that people got during the election campaign. For example, in an article about his fares freeze, Sadiq Khan said,
"Every time the cost of a travel card goes up, for many Londoners it means cutting back on food, heating or even clothing their children."
In fact, it now turns out that even Transport for London had assumed that meant a freeze in travel cards. Details emerged at the end of last week when the Mayor Watch blog got hold of a briefing document written by TfL, detailing how they'd built a travel card freeze into their costings of the policy.
People did not accidentally come away with the impression that Sadiq was talking about freezing travel cards. He wrote an article in Evening Standard where he cited the rising cost of travel cards, the sacrifices people needed to make on their food bills, their ability to feed their kids, the pressure that caused on their ability to rent. He raised it repeatedly, the cost of travel cards and the impact it had on Londoners' income and their disposable income. He engineered a situation where people thought that the fares freeze would encompass all transport fares in London. And it doesn't, and he's pulled away from it, saying he didn't have the power, and this document proves that not only did he have the power and he had the money, but actually even people at Transport for London who were being paid to monitor his manifesto thought that a freeze of travel cards was something that he had in mind.
And the fact that TfL had put a figure on the cost of freezing travel cards suggests to some that despite what the Mayor says, it would be entirely possible.
It's an easy argument to do. He could make that decision and choose to use his transport funding to freeze all fares for Londoners. He's chosen not to do that. It is his choice. And he was given advice on how much it would cost and how he could afford it.
Questions have also been asked about a policy that appears on Sadiq.London, Mr Khan's website from when he was campaigning for office. It clearly says that bus fares would not just be frozen in his first year in office, but cut. And that hasn't happened.
In fact, that's not in the manifesto. I think that was in a sort of a discussion paper on a website earlier on. When the Mayor finally published his manifesto, it was very clear about freezing fares and going for a hopper ticket.
The front page of the City Hall website clearly states that the Mayor is freezing fares in 2017 and then gives details about exactly how it's going to apply. But it won't stop some arguing there should have been this much clarity before the election.
Yeah, Clive Efford, do you think he should have been much clearer?
Well, I think that, let's be clear, that he has cut, frozen the fares for every fare for which he receives the fare box. So all the fares he has control over, he has frozen in line with his promise.
Should have been clear, though, that it isn't all fares because some of the fares are wrapped up in travel cards.
Well, even the quote that was there about travel cards, when he said about people struggling to pay, he didn't then go on and say, oh, and we're going to freeze them. That he was saying that they were a problem for people. And the challenge here is for the government, who control the rail fares, to take the lead from the Mayor for London and freeze the fares. We're getting an appalling service. I mean, don't forget, the Conservative mayoral candidate went into the mayoral election saying they were going to put London's fares up by 17%.
Can I just be absolutely clear what the Labour candidate did, though? Should he have been absolutely clear he was only going to put up those TfL fares?
But he can only put up the fares for which he has the power to control.
But as we heard in that film, Transport for London had the impression that he meant all fares as well.
The figure that has been quoted is the figure that it would have cost TfL had the government frozen fares in line with the mayor's freeze on fares. That's the 600 million figure that's being bandied around. So it's a bit dishonest to suggest that that figure would cover the cost of subsidising fares of private rail providers in order to freeze the fares.
Let's be clear. Sadiq Khan grossly misled Londoners. What he said during the mayoral election campaign, he said no ifs, no buts. No one will pay a penny more. Nothing about TfL fares or travel cards or single fares. No one will pay a penny more is what he said. It quite simply is not true. But he's gone on after the mayoral election when he was trying to excuse what he's done. He claimed that he didn't have the power over these other fares. He claimed it was outside of his power to do a complete fare freeze. And what the...
he's also made it clear since then that he knows theoretically he could pay the toll.
Well,
why didn't you point this out before the election campaign?
We all pointed out that what he was promising was completely undeliverable, and he got into a big strop over it. We did say it was undeliverable. Now,
for what reason, though? Why did you not point out the reason it was undeliverable and ask and be absolutely clear?
For financial reasons, and that is now what's happening, because he said after the election that he didn't have the power to do a complete freeze. This this FOI request by London Travel Watch shows that TfL gave him advice that it was possible.
It shows it can be done because it was done with the help of government money, which froze the rail element, your government money, the rail element, the previous year. Now, he didn't know, he couldn't assume that that element was going to be there, could he?
Well, he could have, if he'd chosen to, he could have used City Hall money to have a complete fare freeze, and that is what the paper advised him, the TfL paper advised him he could do. Now, he chose not to do that. Now, you may agree or disagree with that, but he chose not to keep his promise, and then he tried to cover it up by claiming it was impossible.
Was he being disingenuous here, or was he ignorant about it when he didn't clarify this in the run-up to the election?
You'll have to ask him. I can't speak for him on that, whether he was ignorant of it, but it's quite evident that when you make a promise about freezing fares, you can only freeze those over which you have control. The increase on rail cards is a government decision. It's for the government to follow the lead of the London Mayor and freeze fares. And I would say to Chris, hang on a minute, Chris. The overground service is part of TfL and it is frozen. If the government were to hand over the franchises of suburban rail to Mayor Khan, those fares would be frozen.
Okay,
so you go and ring your friend, Chris Grayling, and get him to hand those rail
Khan has now accepted
over.
He could have frozen them by spending some money. Even Sadiq Khan has now accepted he could have frozen these fares if he had chosen to spend City Hall money on it. He has chosen to break his own promise.
Got the last word. Thanks very much indeed. Now it's time for the rest of the political news in 60 seconds.
The cost of West Ham's London Stadium, almost entirely paid for by the taxpayer, is to be investigated by City Hall. Mayor Sadiq Khan said, "We need to find out how on earth the transformation costs were allowed to skyrocket and whether appropriate checks were made before key decisions were made." The cost of the building has already reached more than £753 million. Staying with football, and Lewisham Council has abandoned the controversial compulsory purchase of land around Millwall Football Club. Millwall FC had argued the development could jeopardise the club's future. Lewisham Council said, "Any decision that the council may take in the future will be a wholly new decision." A very high air pollution warning has been issued for London for the first time under a new alert system. Warnings are being issued at bus stops, roadside signs and tube stations under the new system set up by London Mayor Sadiq Khan.
Millwall season ticket holder, Mr. Efford, dying to talk about Millwall. We're not going to. Air pollution, very high alerts. What difference is this going to make?
Well, I think it's going to draw public attention to this problem that we have. 9,500 deaths a year of premature deaths due to air pollution. So I think this is an important issue. So we've got to review things like decisions over future road building and things like that to say, is this going to make the air quality worse? And if it is, then we've got to rethink this decision. I think it's a very big issue that's growing in London.
Just telling us that it's very high, does that serve much of a purpose?
Well, I think it's a massive problem. I agree with Clive. I've got 3-year-old twins and my wife's asthmatic. I think it's a huge problem. I think we need to look at getting diesel cars off London's roads. They're the things that cause pollution, and governments over the last 20 years of both colours have encouraged diesel cars via the tax system. That's been a catastrophic mistake for the country and for London in particular. So we need urgent action to get those diesel cars off our roads.
And would you do to support that? Get them all off as quickly as possible in 10 seconds?
I think we do need to review the use of diesel vehicles, and yes, we need to prioritise air pollution and to make sure that decisions we make are in accordance with it.
All a bit rough stumped this week, but thanks very much indeed for being here.
Thank you.